Let's move to John Bolton, the former National Security Advisor to Donald Trump from 2018 to 2019 and former ambassador to the UN. Also the author of The Room Where It Happened. Good evening, John. Thank you for being with us tonight. It's a pleasure to have you on the programme. First of all, there's a lot to get through. Let's just go back. 2:30 in the morning, Washington time, early hours. We had Donald Trump on stage. The confirmation from the news networks coming through shortly after that. Just tell me, this is a once in a blue moon event, particularly with a political comeback like this. What were you doing? What was your reaction the moment that result was coming through, and your immediate thoughts at the time on the ramifications?
Well, I was asleep because I didn't think there was any point in staying up. It looked to me like Trump was going to win, and they couldn't call it exactly at that point. But I think you could see the direction. Obviously, that's fortunately or unfortunately turned out to be right.
It's interesting. I know you've said in recent weeks before the election that you weren't ever going to vote for Donald Trump. You consider him, and still do, more of a danger to the office now than he was as the 45th president. But you also wouldn't have voted for Kamala Harris. So your vote, actually, I think you wrote Mike Pence on the ticket, didn't you?
I did, yeah. We didn't develop a Mike Pence wave nationwide, but I still think at least he did his constitutional duty on January the 6th, even if Trump didn't.
Talk to me about Donald Trump, because I mentioned you talked about the danger that he was brought back from the political dead. What is your chief worry as former National Security Advisor as the biggest security issue?
Well, I think the United States and its allies face a wide variety of threats and challenges around the world, and Trump is just not fit to handle them. He doesn't know much about international affairs. He doesn't know much history. He doesn't really understand the stakes that are involved. He thinks that international relations are largely the product of the personal relationships of heads of state, which is dangerously simplistic. And I think because he doesn't see things in strategic terms, everything is transactional, ad hoc, episodic, and seen through the prism of Donald Trump's own benefits from it. He can't distinguish between his personal interest and the national interest. I think our adversaries, Vladimir Putin, Xi Jinping, and others, understand that. I think they can take advantage of Trump, and I think they're going to be working hard to try and do it.
I can kind of guess your thought on this, but I would like to expand just where you see this going. When you've listened to the rhetoric constantly on Donald Trump saying, give me 24 hours, I'll sort out the end of the Ukraine war. I'm not the war president. I'm going to be the president that sees an end and a prevention of World War III. That's how he frames it. He says he won't go into it. He recently told Joe Rogan in this long lasting interview that ultimately he'd speak with Vladimir Putin, he'd speak with Volodymyr Zelensky, and they'd come to a solution. What's your reading, John, from that?
Well, he has no idea how to resolve the war in Ukraine. What he wants is he wants it off the table. I think he wants the war in the Middle East off the table. He views them as Biden's problems, and he doesn't want to be burdened with them. It's fairly easy to end a war if one side surrenders, and I'm very worried that what we're going to see, maybe not immediately, but fairly soon after Trump is inaugurated, is enormous pressure on Ukraine to make compromises that they consider really detrimental to the integrity of the Ukrainian nation, and but with the implicit threat that if they don't agree, the United States is going to cut off military and economic assistance, and I'm afraid the likelihood that most in Europe will do it as well. So I think Ukraine is in a very, very difficult position now that Trump has been elected.
There's a big Europe meeting going on, Ambassador, in Budapest at the moment between European leaders. Interesting that Giorgia Meloni, the Italian Prime Minister, saying today, she said the American, quote, think not what you can do for America. She said she would change it. She said think instead what Europe can do for itself. If you're a European leader right now, what should one be thinking?
Well, President Macron of France is basically now saying, repeating what he said before. He thinks there should be, in effect, a European defense capability. I think that's the short road to the end of NATO, whatever Trump does. We'll see what the Europeans come up with. If they want if they don't mind Trump withdrawing from NATO, I'm sure it'll facilitate his decision.
You've spoken as well, we've heard this a number of times, about the idea that this Trump 2.0 would be an unrestrained gathering of yes people around him, unlike, I think you've referred in the past to, his policy on China would have been far more, quote, all over the place, if it wasn't for those restraining him and saying, actually, this is not the way to go forward with Beijing. When you see the name Susie Wiles come up as his chief of staff, does that give you any reassurance? You've dealt with her. She was part of I think going back to the Reagan administration, all the way to staying with him since 2016. Does that worry you or reassure you?
Well, she really has had no significant role in national government. And while being White House chief of staff is a highly political position, it's a position dealing with governance, not electioneering. In the beginning of his first term, Trump appointed Reince Priebus, the chairman of the Republican National Committee, as his first chief of staff. And so Reince had a lot of political experience, very, very savvy guy, but no experience really in Washington government. And he lasted less than 6 months. We'll see what happens here.
Now, I'm not going to play it to you, John, because I don't want it to be an echo chamber of Donald Trump's comments and insults, but you'll be well aware of the Joe Rogan programme and the latest onslaught saying that you were a good guy, but, quote, you were a nut job, that he should never have employed you, sort of not pulling any punches there in his thoughts about you. And yet he said, scared other leaders, particularly in the room with Xi Jinping or whether they were talking to Putin, that they thought actually the US could carry out its any threat of conflict. Give me your thoughts on essentially your right of reply, really, to consistent name-calling at the subject of your former boss.
Well, it's a juvenile reaction, but it's very typical of Trump. He doesn't address policy issues. He finds policy difficult to understand. So he divides the world into those he thinks are loyal to him and those who are disloyal to him. And for those he thinks are not on his side, he resorts to playground kinds of epithets. I got over it long ago. I'm glad I may have played some role in upsetting the tummies of some of our adversaries. And if I did, that'll make me feel better.
I spoke recently to Anthony Scaramucci, former press officer, chief of press for Donald Trump, left, and clearly has made it clear that he's not supporting Donald Trump. And he said this to me. He said, you have to deal with Donald Trump in a way that you have to not let him think you're telling him something. So tell him stories about scenarios, story time about, say, Beijing or Vladimir Putin, but you have to be very careful, treat him with kid gloves. For those who are dealing with the administration, potentially coming into the administration, if they were listening to, seasoned timers like you, what's your advice on how you deal, how you bring in, how you restrain Donald Trump and his impulsive nature?
Well, there really isn't any good way to do it. I mean, that's why I think he's not fit to be president. Wasn't fit the first time, isn't fit the second time. I thought in taking the job that, like every one of his 44 predecessors, that the gravity of the responsibilities that he had, the importance of the decisions he would make, would discipline his thinking and his decision making and make it a serious process. Became clear very early on that just wasn't going to happen. So the best you could do is try to get him to focus momentarily on something that was important and get a decision and then act on it. But you could go back the next afternoon, or somebody who didn't like the decision could go back the next day and get it reversed, because he has a very short attention span. So this is just not, in a dangerous and threatening world, this is not somebody who should be president.
And that takes us to this point, Ambassador. When you look at the rhetoric previously used, the enemies within, the sense that certainly the Democrats and other former aides to Donald Trump, those within the judicial process, worry that he's coming for them when he gets into office. 2 points, really. One, that 25-minute speech he did, the victory speech, he was seemingly magnanimous. He didn't say anything outwardly insulting towards his adversaries, his competitors. Are we seeing a slight change here? Let me know what you think.
No, I don't think Trump changes at all. I think, he's 78 years old. He is the way he is. Every once in a while, somebody says, you could do this and it would help you if you made a magnanimous speech, and he makes it. We'll see in a couple of weeks how he's doing.
And that extends to you Ambassador, whether you worry personally that you could become a target.
Well, I'm sure I could be, but there's a long list of people he wants retribution against. Maybe I'm further down on the list than some others. So again, we're going to have to wait and see, and we're going to have to wait and see what the courts have to say about it too.
I'm also very interested in your thoughts on Elon Musk, because are we going to look in time at the history books and analyse the effect of X and social media, the 500 million subscribers, and the effect of lack of regulation, the algorithm, the way that it can pivot, and whatever Elon Musk wants to use to formulate a support strategy for Donald Trump? Just tell me what you think as a former National Security Advisor, the level of concern you would have over Elon Musk and the social media strategy there.
Well, I think it's time for revision to the statutes that have given immunity to social media platforms like Twitter. Whether it was a good idea or not in the past, it's clearly not a good idea at the moment. What role Elon Musk turns out to play is very much in question. I don't think he can really come into the government full time, because he'd have to divest huge assets and make full disclosure, which I doubt he wants to do. But he's been a very successful entrepreneur. There's no doubt about that. But as with Susie Wiles, being a successful election politician, being a successful business person isn't the same as success in the government. So I think he's interested. He may have contributions to make. If so, so much the better. But it's an attraction that's very new for him. And maybe when he learns more about it, he'll go back to SpaceX.
John, you voted Mike Pence. Any idea how Mike Pence voted?
I think he's made it clear he didn't vote for Trump, but
not for John Bolton.
Asked him. Maybe he voted for me. Who knows?
A pleasure to talk to you, Ambassador John Bolton, former National Security Advisor. Thank you so much for joining us on France 24. Also, the memoir, as you can see in front of us, The Room Where It Happened from 2019, John's account of his time in the White House. Great to chat to you this evening, Ambassador.
Glad to be with you.